If there's one constant in this life, it is that things constantly change.
The only constant is change itself.
We all experience changes in life.
You can't stop it.
Changes that we look forward to with anticipation, and changes that we simply dread.
I am going to miss, I am going to miss it.
Only one thing is for sure. Things will not stay the same, no matter how much we would prefer that they did. When change occurs, there are only two choices: to despair that a change has taken place and simply assume that things will become worse, or we can view it with optimism and a hope that things will improve. There is a third choice, however, and that is not to decide at all. But if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
The Jones Hardware property has been sold, and a new Chase Bank will be put in its place.
No matter what time of the day, it's Pompton Queen.
The whole community. That's I love that thought.
It was made by Dr. Lux of Germany, whoever he was.
When he came home from the service, he really realized that there was a great need for a hospital in this area.
You know, we wish Jones Hardware was there with Robbie behind the counter.
I love this town. I love the residents.
And he built Carlson Supply Company.
But if you wanted to sell your house, you needed legal advice. He got changed and he stood in the corner.
It's difficult to find time to actually look back.
As you tell me about all these things, you know, all these memories, all this stuff, you're gonna miss it.
I miss it already.
March 1664. King Charles II awards the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam to his brother, the Duke of York, even though at this time the two countries are technically at peace. A few short months later, 4 British warships carrying several hundred soldiers arrive in New Amsterdam harbor. The assembled forces demand that the Dutch surrender the island, and although Peter Stuyvesant, the peg-legged Director General of New Netherland, was prepared to mount a defense, prominent leaders persuaded him to stand down. September 8, 1664, Peter Stuyvesant signs over the colony of New Amsterdam to the British without any bloodshed. It goes on to become New York.
Our foundation is really in what was called New Amsterdam at that time, which was the lower part of Manhattan today. Wall Street at that point was actually a wall around Fort Amsterdam. When the Duke of York and the British came in and wanted to seize what is now New York, the Dutch left New Amsterdam and they went up the Hudson River and they settled along the banks of the Hudson. And then they came into what is now New Jersey, and our congregation's roots, our founding was really by the Pompton River, and there in 1706 is the first recorded baptism for our congregation.
In the early 1700s, worship was radically different. Many times, pastors and clergy would take up horseback and bring their ministry to the people. It wouldn't take long, however, for the Dutch Reformed Church to require the building of a sanctuary.
And they decided to build a larger church and a better building. At that point, they had ministers who would ride horseback from town to town and meet the spiritual needs of a congregation. The services were in Dutch at that time in our history, and it took a while before they would accept the English language as the norm for our worship services. But for the Dutch in the area, having a central place where the community could gather, where there would be support for one another, there would be the religious life. The church really served multiple needs at that time.
The church quickly became entrenched in the township as the central gathering place where the community could come together to worship. But it also became what is now referred to as the intersection of faith and life.
I kind of see it as the heartbeat of the community, that the church is at the intersection of faith and life in our community. And that was true in the early 1700s, and that's still true today. In October of 1937, on a pretty cold morning, and there was an electrical fire that took place, and the fire, it was a Sunday morning, and the fire spread very quickly. And I actually have a member in my congregation today who lived on Wilroo at that time, and she remembers seeing the fire from her living room. She remembers putting her hand on the pane of glass of her living room and just feeling the heat. It was such an incredibly disastrous event, not just for the church, but for the community, to see the church in the center of town, the intersection of faith and life, just in a raging fire. The sanctuary, because it was so old, even at that time, it was, the wood had to be really dry, and it was engulfed in just a huge flame. The outside walls stood and still stand today, and there's something really symbolic about that even with the disaster that could occur on the inside, there was something of the structure that remained present even to this day. There's footage of the steeple falling and burning and falling over the Newark Pompton Turnpike, and just the grief that the congregation felt at that time. We have the sermon that Reverend Cater preached on that morning. They went ahead and gathered, I think the following week, they gathered together in a different space, and the sermon he preached is basically, we will rise again. And from that point, which was, when you think about what was going on in the history of our nation, it was in the midst of the Depression. We were coming toward the end of the Depression, but it was a time when people didn't have an abundant amount of financial resources to give to something. And yet, not only did the church community raise the funds, the church went out to the greater community, to neighbors and friends of this church who didn't at that time belong to this church, and the whole community. I love that thought. The whole community of Pequannock Township built this church structure. So in 1939, we have video footage of what took place, and there was a town parade, similar to the memorial parade that we have today, going up the Newark-Pompton Turnpike. And I'm sure there are people still around the township that recognize people in those videos, even from 1939. But when you think of what was going on in our nation with really the end of the Depression, that people were getting jobs again, there was just this hope and this optimism that people had in general. And I think the rebuilding of the sanctuary tapped into what was already being spread throughout not just our community, but throughout the nation. It was a hope that the better days were going to be in front of us. We weren't aware at that time how close we were to war again as a nation.
It took the church almost 2 full years to recover from the catastrophic fire that destroyed almost the entire sanctuary. In the years following the Great Fire, the church went on to expand even further. In 1972, the church makes a historic decision that changes the course of their history when a motion is made and accepted by the consistory. It states, quote, that nominations be made open to eligible women as well as men for positions on the future consistories, end quote. The first women are elected to the consistory shortly thereafter. 2006, 35 years after women are finally allowed to become members of the consistory, the First Reformed Church of Pompton Plains calls Reverend Kathleen Edwards Chase to become its first woman senior pastor. The call is controversial, even though it is almost 300 years after the church's beginnings and long overdue.
My father was an elder or deacon or something when she was brought up, and he was always for her, and it was mostly the older ones that didn't want to make the change to a woman, but I think we're all happy that they have.
The respect that the town and everyone has for her after all the things that she went through in the beginning, all right, is phenomenal.
Pastors always fall in love with their congregations, and that's kind of the focus. I didn't realize that my being a female minister would be an issue for anyone.
I see people by their qualifications, and she clearly proved her qualifications early on.
And she is the First Reformed Church. You know, talk about opening the doors. She's definitely there whenever anything is needed.
To be honest with you, I never thought about the fact that I'm female now going to lead a multi-staff, larger congregation.
But you know, PK is she's definitely held in high standards with the First Reformed Church and the person is a First Reformed Church.
Because we believe so strongly that our role is to open our space to the needs of the community.
There is the food pantry is located, and the church provides invaluable support to the community in times of crisis.
First Reformed Church is the first to step up to open up their doors and help however they can assist the residents of Pequannock.
It was the church leaders who actually donated a piece of property that the town hall is on. As part of that kind of gift, the idea was that, you know, a town hall was to be built here.
So when there have been issues, when the community needed help, the church was there to help the community.
The cemetery really represents the history of our township, and many of the leaders, in fact probably most of the leaders in our township since its beginning are buried in what is now the old portion of the cemetery.
We have soldiers buried from the Revolution to every conflict thereafter.
One of the most important things is to keep the flag flying, and there was one person that was dedicated to carrying that flag throughout the battles, and anytime that person went down, being shot or whatever, someone had to retrieve it. Well, in this case, it was a huge battle, and this James Evans went back through the battle, getting his way to the flag, and retrieved it and led the charge with the members so that they can get to continue the battle.
September 12th, 1845, James Robert Evans is born in New York City. No one could have imagined then what he would go on to accomplish in his life. June 30th, 1861, Evans enlists in the military to fight in the Civil War. Although he's only 18 years old at the time, he gives his birth date as 1843.
I think in those times, they had kids going into the service very young. They were all gung-ho and, they want to get the battle going and so forth. So they were young and they took them in. They didn't have rules like they do today as much as they did. And they didn't check as hard as they did for how old the individuals were. They just needed people to fight.
During his service, he goes on to fight in battles at Fair Oaks, Second Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, and the battle for which he is most widely known. May 5th, 1864, Battle of the Wilderness. During the skirmish, the color bearer is killed. With the American flag in jeopardy of being captured by the enemy, Evans, only 18 years of age, sprints out to the front of the line under fierce fire and in the face of a rapidly advancing enemy, rescues the regimental flag. Later in the battle, he advances into enemy territory and retrieves crucial information that saves the regiment from, quote, probable annihilation, an act that earns him a promotion to the rank of captain. June 29th, 1864, Petersburg, Virginia. James R. Evans musters out of the service. Upon leaving Virginia, he returns to Jersey City, where he meets and marries Julia Kinsey. 1875, James and his bride move to Pequannock Township and take up residence in the historic Martinbury home, starting a legacy in the wondrous, beautiful valley. During this time at Pequannock, and due to his substantial leadership skills, Evans goes on to hold several prominent positions in the township. At different times during his residence, he serves on the Board of Education, keeps the general store at Pompton Plains, and was even the constable. In addition, he also served as the railroad agent for the Erie Railroad at the Pequannock Railroad Station for 26 years, where he also served as the postmaster for Pequannock. February 25th, 1894, James Robert Evans receives the Congressional Medal of Honor for his gallantry on the battlefield at the Wilderness, which he accepts in a ceremony at the Berry House. Evans is now buried in the cemetery of the First Reformed Church of Pompton Plains, New Jersey, and is the only Medal of Honor recipient at the site.
It is a fact, normally, that still today, they have cemetery plots where they try to keep the family all together. And in this case, this is the family stone. This is Mr. Evans' plot. This is his mother. And I believe these are his children on either side of him.
Right. That would be Sedgwick.
Sedgwick and
Loretta.
Loretta, yeah, that's kind of hard.
Those are his kids. And then his wife right here.
His mother. That's his mother.
Oh, that's his mother.
And his wife is in here too.
And that would be Julia Kinsey.
That's
right
correct.
There.
That's correct.
There you go.
Now this is the family stone, and this is the stone that we got later on for Mr. Evans as a recognition of his Medal of Honor. Well, these four stones represent the commitment that the town has for the people that participated in those four wars: World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
This is in memory of Maria, the wife of Peter Mandeville, who died the 12th day of March, 1806, aged 84 years old, which means she was born in the early 1720s, one of the earliest settlers in the valley.
basically what I try to do is to keep the stones in as good a shape and condition as possible. The groundskeepers do a pretty good job here. We stay on them a bit to make sure, but they do a great job. And what I try to do is to keep the stones of the veterans intact. I try to keep medallions identifying each of the veterans, and we have about 750 veterans in this cemetery. And we try to keep them identified, and we try to keep a flag on their gravesite. Every year and around Memorial Day, we place flags on every veteran in the cemetery, and we do this every year.
And not even to interrupt you, but I have to say, as a veteran myself, I'm touched that you do that. I think that's really cool. And I'm going to just right here on camera, just going to thank you, because you know what? That's an effort that that is not undertaken by many people, and you doing it's a very, very appreciated thing. So I just want to let you know that.
Thank you.
Of the 565 municipalities in the state of New Jersey, there are countless forms of government.
They were contemplating a different form of government for the township in the manager form, which, my personal opinion, is it's the most professional form of local government in the state.
In Pequannock Township, we are governed under the Faulkner Act, under a form of government known as manager council.
I just thought it was my duty to run for council 7 years ago, so this is the third year of my second term, and the second time that I've been chosen to be mayor.
That's what I've always considered myself to be. I'm a public servant to my community. I love this town.
And I think everybody does, not just me. We want to listen to what the townspeople want and then make educated decisions.
And it's easily broken into thirds. A third of my time is spent working with the Township Council, a third of my time is spent working with the staff, and a third of my time is spent working directly with the residents.
We also are in the early stages of creating a new master plan in town. Hasn't been done in a while.
I'm excited to be involved with the master plan.
One of the primary goals of any good master plan is to include the public. So public input on what the future of this community will look like is paramount.
It should be updated on an ongoing basis. A lot of towns will update a master plan once every 10 years.
A master plan is a document that is under the jurisdiction of the planning board, and it really focuses on the vision and the future of the community.
We hired a great company to help us with the master plan. We still want to keep the quaint small town feel, but we feel that we can accomplish that with the new master plan and also make it beneficial for some of the business owners in town.
If you don't work the master plan and execute the things in the master plan, you're never going to get anything done.
Ultimately, I'm here to make sure that the government runs efficiently and provides the services to the residents that they know and expect.
Family and Friends for Freedom raises funds for combat wounded military, all branches of the military. And its purpose is to help the wounded, because when they come back from Iraq or Afghanistan, there's major problems: PTSD, TBI, lung recovery, slow VA care. On September 22nd, 2004, my son Jim was severely wounded in Iraq, and we waited a full week before they finally moved Jim back to Bethesda. When we saw him, and we were there at the Fisher House, we saw the need for other families. So when we came home, we began the foundation.
Their commitment to take something that at the time for them felt tragic and bringing something good out of it. I think that's the story of our township. That's what we do well.
After we got that phone call, mostly we sat and waited we spoke to the commanding officer at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We asked to go to Germany, but they told us he would be en route back and we'd cross in the air and it wouldn't be worth it for us to go. Basically, we just sat around waiting for phone calls, and it was a very long week.
You see it at the beefsteak dinner, that support at the Brownstone, where just hundreds of people show up.
Beefsteak is one of our biggest events. That's our largest fundraiser. Throughout the year, we have an attendance of about 500 people.
They 100% goes out. They don't keep anything for themselves, and it's just awesome. They've helped people in every service.
It brings back a lot of memories. When we first heard that song, Scott, it took him 2 years to record it. Once he started writing it and perform. When we first heard it, he never told us what he was doing. So we're at this event, and here he gets up on stage and he sings this song. There wasn't a dry eye in the house.
You look out the window, and suddenly the sky turns gray. The raindrops begin to fall, then your deepest fear came. Phone rings loud as you fall to the ground and pray. You say to yourself, there is no way, it's only been 8 days. You start to scream and you start to cry and you say, Lord, he's too young to die, and I beg, please don't take my brother tonight, because he's an American man, he's an American dad, he's an American soldier, he's all that we have. Die for your freedom, he protect your rights, oh, but Lord, please, and bring home and tonight. And it's 2 years later, and it's almost to the day. As you say goodbye, you just got to believe. As you stare high at the flag in the sky, a tear rolls down your face, it's American pride. And I beg, please don't take my brother tonight.
We have a lot of veterans. We have sent a lot of our town residents off to war.
I wish I knew the easy answer of why patriotism runs so strong in the Township of Pequannock.
I don't know that I can help with what causes that, but it certainly exists.
Maybe it's because it predates the Revolution. Maybe it's because at the First Reformed Church we have soldiers buried from the Revolution to every conflict thereafter.
So, I mean, there's an element of patriotism and volunteerism in this town that is unlike any other community I've ever seen.
And it has a history of being a history of sending off people to the war, and sadly having people that were killed in every war.
He's an American dad, he's an American soldier, he's all that we have. He's he died for your freedom, he protect your rights, oh, but Lord, please, and bring him home and tonight.
Tell us whatever it is they can do to help. I think it's important that they know.
Okay, checks can be mailed to Family and Friends for Freedom Fund at 40 Woodland Place, Pompton Plains, 07444. Our website, you can make donations on there as well. It's www.injuredmarinesfund.org.
February 2nd, King Louis XVI approves a deployment of forces under the code name Expedition Particulière, led by General Count de Rochambeau. The expedition joins Washington and Rochambeau together to fight Cornwallis at the legendary Battle of Yorktown. May 2nd, 1780. France's King Louis XVI sends a fleet of 7,000 to the New World to bolster the Continental forces in their fight against the British. August 1781. King Louis's French army, under the firm control of General Rochambeau, make camp on the land in Pequannock that is now occupied by Pequannock Valley Middle School on their march from Rhode Island to Virginia to join Washington prior to the crucial battle. The Continental Army would go on to victory, defeating Cornwallis and the British, freeing the colonies, and setting America on its way to glory and prosperity as a sovereign nation. January 21st, 1781. The Pompton line of Washington's Continental Army is hungry, without basic supplies, and they've not been paid in over a year. To make matters worse, they're suffering through a brutal winter, the third such winter in as many years. The men are at their absolute breaking point. The troops get word of the Pennsylvania line's successful mutiny attempt and make the fateful decision to do the same. It is an act that changes history. Well, the Pompton line had witnessed what the Pennsylvania line did, which was a successful mutiny attempt where their demands were met, even though they had killed an officer in the mutiny. In spite of that, they were given a full pardon and their demands were met. The men pack up and begin their march towards Trenton in order to have their grievances heard by the state government. The men got as far as Chatham, where they were met by their regimental commander, Ethan Dayton, and two representatives of the New Jersey legislature, Colonel Frederick Frelinghuysen and Reverend James Caldwell, all three highly respected officers. A committee of 3 sergeants, led by Sergeant Major George Grant, was elected to talk for the mutineers. Grant pointed out that the men were not traitors, and in fact, had taken a solemn oath to execute anyone who attempted to go over to the British side. Dayton offered the men a blanket pardon if they would, quote, act in a soldierly manner, end quote, and make an orderly return to their huts at Pompton under the command of their officers. The men agreed, but the pack began to unravel on the march back to Pompton as some men ignored orders from the officers that they disliked. This resulted in an officer having a bayonet put to his chest. A melee ensued, and when a shot was fired, the rest of the brigade responded with a show of armed resistance. Tempers did cool, however, and when the men turned into quarters later that night after returning, they had no idea what was in store for them in the morning. General George Washington himself, having arrived at Ringwood by sleigh, had no intention of letting this second mutiny in less than a month go unpunished. Washington assembled a force of nearly 600 New England troops and placed them under the command of General Robert Howe. He ordered Howe to, quote, compel the mutineers into unconditional submission, to show no leniency and to grant no terms. When they are subdued, you will instantly execute a few of the most guilty and incendiary leaders. End quote. 1 a.m., January 27th, 1781. The troops leave Ringwood to begin the 8-mile march through deep snowdrifts and windy conditions to Pompton, and they arrive at the camp's base at dawn. At daylight, the mutineers awake to find themselves surrounded on all sides by Howe's men. All avenues of escape were blocked. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Barber is sent to the camp to explain to the mutineers the hopelessness of their situation. So when the Pompton line turns in on that night, there's no way that they can know the amount of trouble they're in, and there's no way they know what will be awaiting them in the morning as daylight breaks, and exactly That happens as they awake to find the camp completely surrounded on all avenues. All avenues of escape are blocked, and they're ordered to come out of their tents, lay down their weapons, and face a court-martial, which they do. A court-martial was immediately convened, and 3 leaders of the revolt were found guilty and sentenced to die by firing squad. 12 of the most guilty mutineers were chosen to be the firing squad and were seen to be crying as they loaded their weapons in anticipation of having to put down their leaders, themselves being just as guilty. 6 men were ordered to be the executioners. 3 were ordered to aim at the victim's chest, and the other 3 at his head. Sergeant David Gilmore was led out first, blindfolded and forced onto his knees. The order to fire was given, but for some reason lost to history, all 6 shots missed. Perhaps it's not surprising that, the 6 men who fired the first time all missed, as a lot of them did not want to complete this most grisly of tasks that was put before them. And they were ordered to do it, and they all missed. And, did they miss on purpose? I'll let you be the judge. The 6 remaining executioners were brought forward, and when they were ordered to fire, Gilmore's life was finally and instantly extinguished. The second condemned, John Tuttle, was brought out and by first fire sent into eternity. The third offender, Sergeant Major George Grant, being less criminal and by the recommendation of his officers and to his own unspeakable joy, received a pardon. The bodies were said to be buried right at the site of the court-martial. The site of the court-martial and mutiny, however, remain a mystery as local historians disagree on the location of events. Nothing tells the story of an American small town like its historic homes. Historic homes, whether 50 years old or erected in 1720 like the Martin Berry home, all have tales to tell about the families and the people who have lived there throughout their history. Pieces of the past are often scattered about old homes, and piecing that past together is the very thing that drives the passion of owning such a home in the first place. For those afflicted with the passion and desire to own a historic home, the best part of it is the connection to the past and the different ways that people adapted to changing circumstances. In Pequannock, it's not possible to talk about historic homes without including the Martin Berry home at the top of the list. The home is not the oldest structure in Pequannock Township. That distinction belongs to the Van Sohn house. But built in 1720 by Martin Berry and his wife Maria, who came to this wondrous, beautiful valley to continue to worship freely. The Martin Berry home has seen a long succession of owners, ranging from the common to the historic to even the bank, who in 1937 foreclosed on the home. The home went on to host many different families, with as many as 19 people residing in the residence at one time.
This whole area was settled by the Dutch in the late 1600s. Among them was a man named Martin Berry, who moved in here and built this house for his wife, Maria. At one point, a restaurant in the 2 rooms next to us called the Stone House Inn, which was a very interesting operation because you had seating in the dining room over there, while the meals were actually cooked downstairs in an open fireplace, and the food was actually delivered through a dumbwaiter up to the dining room. This house was actually foreclosed upon during the Depression, not long after the Stone House Inn folded. Eleanor met Charlie out here in New Jersey when they moved here from New York State. She had fallen in love with the house from the first time she saw it, which was well before they ended up buying it. And when they bought it, in fact, they weren't actually aware that it was a historic house.
So this part of the house was part of the 1830 construction, the last part of the construction for the house, and this kitchen then served as the kitchen for the house from then until about 1940. After the Bogarts were here for a little while, they understood the value of this house being much more than what its price could be.
You're here today to dedicate this house and to formally announce it is now part of the Township of Pequannock, and it is a place that we're all proud of, and we're happy that the Township of Pequannock has purchased it with the help of the County of Morris.
Right. All right, so this is, I'm back with Paul Haveman, and apparently Martin said something to offend him. No, I'm just kidding.
What do you mean, no pool table?
There's no pool table?
This is a pitchfork. Now the neat thing about this pitchfork is that it's one piece of wood.
Oh.
So it was either found growing this way, or whoever made it
shaped it that way.
Shaped it that way when the plant was growing. First, you got to get it going.
And then the person doing that would also sharpen the knife, or would somebody else be sharp? They'd be doing it like that, huh?
You know, we will need some workspace. We'll need some storage space. But I think our goal is to have as much of this building open to the public as we possibly can when it's time for us to be able to do that.
When you're in the background, sometimes you don't see that, see all that support. And the overall support that we've gotten from the community today, and also from the town over the years, has been phenomenal.
June 28, 1934, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is instrumental in creating the Federal Housing Administration as an agency of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The program was meant to provide relief of the crushing housing crisis during the Great Depression.
During the Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came with the National Housing Act, and the FHA was part of it. People lost their houses. Back in the early 30s, mortgages were 3 to 5 years only. They were balloon notes at the end, and the people had to pay them off. People were out of work at that time and during the Depression, so Roosevelt said, well, we got to get the housing back in, because the banks were foreclosing on the houses, had a lot of inventory that was worthless at the time because people couldn't afford them. So they insured the mortgage for mortgage lenders and brokers, and they were given mortgages with 3.5% down with 30-year payouts, which made it affordable to most of the people in the country.
With the backing of the FHA, financial institutions and mortgage lenders could confidently offer more diverse financing options and longer financing terms due to the insurance against default. And just where was the nation's first FHA-backed mortgage purchase? Pequannock, New Jersey.
Not many people in town know it, but this house was the first FHA-approved house in 1934 when it was formed. So it was the first in the nation to have an FHA mortgage on it. June 28, 2004, which was the exact anniversary, Representative Rodney Freeland Heisen for our district, along with the Assistant Secretary of the HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, along with many other federal and local dignitaries, came to this house, and they put a plaque on it.
Annie Oakley, born Phoebe Moses, was one of the most well-known women of her time, especially by the girls of her time.
Annie Oakley was an American sharpshooter and exhibition shooter in the late 1800s who captured the imagination of young ladies during that time.
Although historically, it is generally accepted that Annie Oakley at some point purchased a home in Pompton Plains, some local historians disagree on this notion.
December 26, 1896, from the Booton newspaper. Miss Annie Oakley, the sharpshooter, has bought a farm at Pompton Plains and will fit it up as a private shooting ground.
As famous as Annie was, it took an act of divine intervention for her to get her big break on the Buffalo Bill show. But once she did, she took advantage, kicking in the door to success.
Well, there was a boat on the Mississippi River, and the cast, as you might say, the cast was on that boat, and the boat sank. And the sharpshooter who was involved in the show lost all of his tools. He had no guns in there. He couldn't perform anymore, and she just stepped right up and took over, and that was the end of it for the other sharpshooter.
At 15 years of age, Annie's life turned away from her troubled childhood and toward a new beginning when she found herself in a contest against the best shooter of the period, Mr. Frank E. Butler. Butler hit 24 of 25 targets, but Annie was not deterred.
Frank Butler was a sharpshooter, and he would go around earning money as a sharpshooter, and people would bet against him, and they'd put up the local champion. And this hotel owner put a 15-year-old girl that he knew up against Frank E. Butler, and they had 25 shots each. Frank only made 24. Annie Oakley made 25. Not only did she win the match, she won the man, because a year later, she married him. At one point, there was talk about going to war with Spain, and she contacted President McKinley, and she offered the United States 50 lady sharpshooters who would pay for their own ammunition. She was quite ahead of her time.
Well, my grandparents were from Sweden originally, and my grandfather came over with my grandmother, Julia and Ivor Carlson. My grandfather used to be in the construction industry, and he built Carlson Supply Company later on in his life, and he needed a lot of different materials, so he built Carlson Supply Company, which then turned into a lot of other different industries that he needed. So he built the gas station on the highway, and he built All Service. The gas station fed his trucks, and All Service was a mechanical place to fix his vehicles.
Right behind me is the Carlson Bauer home. Over the years, they have changed the structure of the home.
He went and bought this piece of property, and he took the original house that was sitting basically right here, and he split it into 3 pieces. And where those houses are here in Pompton Plains.
They brought a couple of them down the road here in Pequannock Pompton Plains.
He took pieces of the house, whether they're the top, the sides, or what other sections, and he used them, and he moved them over with telephone poles and bulldozers and or trucks.
Had this 3rd piece, and he decided he would take this one down and he would rebuild, and here, this is what is standing here today, is the Bauer residence on this beautiful property.
Okay, so this is my horse facility here, and I started this back in when I was 13 years old as a business, and my parents allowed me and tried to let me do whatever I wanted to do in starting an equine industry. Not them ever dreaming what I've produced today, and have it the largest equestrian center in New Jersey.
How many horses you have over there?
We have about 150 horses together with the 2 places, and we're pretty busy, and the townspeople love coming here and petting horses, and now we're working on doing some new things with the trail behind here. There's going to be a bicycle path and a walkway path. The original barn that was actually here that you're looking at, the tan barn, right across the way, used to be all gray barn, and it was had big windows in it and stuff. It was my grandfather's his dairy barn, and downstairs was where he took care of the dairy, and upstairs had a big hayloft and stuff, and it used to hold the cattle there. And then if you turn to the left over here where the tractor trailers are, that barn used to sit right there where the tractor trailers are.
And that was moved on a Sunday morning.
And a Sunday morning, he moved it right across the railroad tracks.
Pequannock Township is fortunate to have its very own community hospital, Chilton Medical Center, a 260-bed medical facility located on West Parkway. The people of Pequannock have long been used to coming to the hospital for all of their medical needs, including maternity services, cancer care, cardiovascular health, and more. But longtime residents remember a time when there was no hospital at all, and only one doctor was in town, Dr. Chilton.
Our first aid squad, which was organized fairly early, and my mother was on the original first aid squad. Anybody that needed to go to a hospital had to be transported all the way to Patterson, and the roads weren't even, a lot of the roads that you think of to get there quickly now weren't there at the time.
December 1st, 1921. Forrest Spencer Chilton III is born in Syracuse, New York. Forrest spends his early life with grandparents in Brooklyn, New York, before moving with his family to Pompton Plains, New Jersey. With the United States participating in World War II, Forrest decides on March 21st, 1942, to put his college career on hold. In a move not uncommon at the time, he volunteers to enter the United States Army Air Corps. June 21st, 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day, Forrest participates in a dive-bombing mission to St. Quentin, France. He is the pilot and sole occupant of a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber when he is hit by anti-aircraft ground fire. His aircraft is destroyed, and although witnesses report that he ejected and that his parachute opened, he is never found and presumed dead. In 1947, Dr. Forrest S. Chilton II and his wife Elizabeth, a nurse, donate a piece of land across from the First Reformed Church, Friendly Manse. Their wish is to build a hospital in memory of their son.
He did have a son who was killed in the war, and he deeded the property on which the old Chilton Hospital was built to the town to build a hospital. And people got behind the idea, and it eventually was built.
For the 7 years that followed, Dr. Chilton and his supporters raised the required funds from the community by soliciting donations door to door, holding grassroots raffles, and even performing in hospital shows in which the doctors themselves performed at the First Reformed Church.
It was used as his primary office for all his medical treatments and whatnot.
Dr. Chilton himself had a little, very small, I think 4 or 5 bed maternity hospital over his office on the Turnpike.
My dad opened a small hospital above his office on the Turnpike, which is across from the Tavern 5 now. And it was a maternity hospital, and periodically I run into people that were actually born in that maternity hospital.
In the time that Dr. Chilton was living down the street and working out of this office here, he spent a lot of his extra hours raising funds in order to be able to promote a hospital that he was trying to get built in town.
I think the most fun was the plays and musicals they used to put on every year, and the doctors would actually really make fools of themselves, but it was a ball, and people from all over the communities in the area just looked forward to it.
They did everything from, gatherings and getting money from friends and family to even dressing up in drag on a rare occasion with other doctor friends of his.
My father had a friend who was dating a woman in New York who was a former Ziegfeld Follies girl, Consuela Flowerton, and she was at this point now a cabaret singer, and she offered to come out and perform in this hospital show. Now they had this New York entertainer who was staying at our house, and my mother said, she came and she performed, and it was a smashing success, and people were beating the door down trying to get tickets for the next night, when my mother got a call from the man who was the orchestra leader, who was apparently a little bit straight-laced. And he found her double entendre songs a little too racy, and he said, my band will not perform if that woman performs again. So my poor mother had to explain to Consuela that she would not be, because I couldn't do away with the band. He was for everybody.
My father had in his office a jar, and he would say to his patients, instead of paying me for your office visit, just drop money in the jar for our hospital.
1954, the quote, Old Chilton, end quote, opens his doors to the public, and it is named in memory of Forrest Chilton III. It's a sparkling new 50-bed facility located next to the township's municipal building. It takes to the community quickly and grows to 119 beds by 1961. November 20th, 1971, the West Parkway facility is dedicated. June 26, 1974, eventual Hall of Fame Yankee shortstop Derek Sanderson Jeter is born at the Old Chilton. During his playing days, he becomes the most famous person born in the township. Residents and historians disagree on whether Jeter was born there or at the new building. You can confirm with absolute 100% certainty that he was born in the Old Chilton.
Yes, he was.
1981, Dr. Chilton's dream hospital is still growing, and it becomes necessary to expand the new building to increase services, and the capacity of the facility and construction of an expanded hospital begins. The hospital merges with Atlantic Health Systems in January 2014 and becomes Chilton Medical Center.
So about 5 years ago now, Chilton became part of a member hospital, an affiliate member of Atlantic Health System, which has 5 hospitals as part of it. Morristown Medical Center, Overlook Medical Center, Hackettstown, Newton Medical Center, and Chilton Medical Center. So when a hospital becomes part of a health system, it gets access to greater resources. So Chilton Medical Center has access to technology and resources that we never had when we were an independent hospital.
Today, Chilton Medical Center is a 260-bed acute care nonprofit community hospital with approximately 1,350 employees. It features some of the most sophisticated diagnostic and therapeutic equipment available. More than 550 physicians, representing more than 60 different specialties, hold staff privileges at Chilton Medical Center. The hospital serves residents from more than 33 communities and provides care for people of all ages.
As far as the family's concerned, at this point, at the time the West Parkway opened, was about the time that my dad retired. So they weren't as involved in the hospital anymore, and he died like 3 years later. So there wasn't a lot of involvement, but he was a patient in the West Parkway building soon after it opened, and that is where he passed away.
My father knew Doc Chilton very well. He once, funny story, he broke his arm once, and and I guess his father brought him over to Doc's place. It was like a little house or the beginning of something. But my father always laughed because he wrapped it up and then he threw the keys to his father and said, "Lock up when you're done. He needs to sit here for a half hour," and he left.
My role as the leader of Chilton Medical Center is to preserve that history, to value it, but to also look forward.
Baseball, apple pie, and diners? That's right. Diners are arguably more American than apple pie or our nation's pastime. July 3rd, 1912, Jerry O'Mahony sells his first mobile lunch wagon, built at his home at 7 East 16th Street in Bayonne by his family friend, John Hanf. The wagon is bought by Jersey City entrepreneur Michael Griffin for $800 and a contract granting permission for Griffin to operate the unit in West Hoboken in the vicinity of Patterson Plank Road and Summit Avenue. The mobile lunch wagon, like those the O'Mahonys made, actually debuted in 1872 on the streets of Providence, Rhode Island. But the diner business found fertile ground in New Jersey thanks to the state's population density and superior infrastructure.
The ancestral origins of diners go back to the 1870s. There was a man who wheeled a little cart around Providence, Rhode Island, and he had the idea that he would know when the factories would get out and when the trains would arrive, and he had this little cart, and he made hard-boiled eggs, and he made sandwiches, and he had coffee, and this idea of serving people right on the street. That became known as the night lunch culture.
Diners became an integral part of New Jersey's culture, commerce, mythology, and roadside landscape. The sale put into motion a chain of events that led to New Jersey's golden age of diner manufacturing, which ultimately made the Garden State the diner capital of the world.
The diner business really took root here in New Jersey, and we are the diner capital of the world. A lot of people know that, but from my point of view, we're the diner capital of the world, not only because of that, but also because we were the diner manufacturing capital of the world.
In the decades that followed, O'Mahony's innovation led to nearly all the major U.S. diner builders to set up shop in New Jersey, producing factory-built, stainless steel, art-like diners that the public loved. The early diners manufactured in Jersey were glistening and glittering nods to ingenious American industrial design. Many of them still stand today, echoing through time in a nod to a far-off past in American culture.
In the 20th century, most of the major diner builders in America were right here in New Jersey. They're all gone now. And one of those was Master Diners in Pequannock. And these are the companies, Jersey guys, they designed and built diners. And these stainless steel gems they're admired around the world.
Companies building diners in the Garden State pumped out hundreds of examples of the diners between 1931 and the 1950s. In fact, in 1951, it is estimated that there were over 6,000 diners in the United States, serving an astounding 2.5 million customers every single day.
A diner was an eatery built in a factory with a modular concept, and all of the Everything was built right into the product. The kitchen, you had all the utilities, the gas, the electricity, the water. It was usually built in sections, usually 2 or 3 sections with the vestibule. And then those sections were trucked to the site where the diner was going to operate. They would be assembled there on the site, and that was the classic definition of what a diner was.
September 1901. 16-year-old Arthur Schelling boards a steamship bound for New York City, where he hopes to take part in the American dream. He leaves Germany without his family, and soon after arriving, talks his way into a job as a bartender.
The company began with Arthur Schelling coming to the United States from Germany when he was a teenager. And apparently he was a very charming, enterprising guy. He started working in the food business. He ran a delicatessen. Apparently he was pretty good with design. He was pretty good with business. He was a salesman for Paramount Diners. That was a diner builder in Haledon.
After a few years, he departs to open his own business, and in 1937 builds his first diner, which later becomes the Newton Diner. The diner was built in Pequannock on Schelling's Irving Street homestead, and it was the production of that diner that set the stage for more diners to come. September 1940, Schelling acquires more land along Irving Street and decides to incorporate his business. He calls it Master Diners. The rest is, as they say, history, as Master Diners goes on to build over 60 gleaming diners, including the William Penn Grill, the largest diner built by the company in Philadelphia, and Al's Diner, delivered to Chicopee, Massachusetts in 1958, which was added to the National Register of Historic Places. The diner was originally known as the White Diner and still stands today.
Well, they were a small company. As far as I can tell, they only built about 60 diners in their day, but they built some very nice ones. In fact, the one up in Chicopee, Massachusetts, Al's Diner, that has been recognized on the National Historic Register as being a very important place.
I remember going there with my mom, and we'd go into the inside part where they bent the sheet metal, the stainless steel sheet metal. And there are these just huge machines for bending metal, and as a little kid, I just thought it was interesting and scary at the same time.
Master Diners and Schelling continued building diners until 1955, when he suffered a heart attack and had to curtail his activity with the company thereafter. The last diner built by Master Diners was the Top Hat Diner in Wayne, New Jersey, which became the Spindletop Diner and later still became the North Star 23 Diner. The diner business in New Jersey slowed in the late 1950s, and by 1960, Master Diners dissolved their corporation.
It's just a lot of fun to be part of that heritage and part of that history, because it's definitely history.
Arthur Schelling passed away in 1961 after helping to spawn a culture in Pequannock, New Jersey, and perhaps a nation that carried on with the opening of the Coolidge Diner on Route 23 in Pequannock, mere feet from the eventual location of the iconic Pompton Queen Diner.
It's interesting how it developed, because before the Pompton Queen was the Coolidge Diner, a couple 100 feet south of the existing location. And eventually that was bought by the family who developed the Pompton Queen. They put a more modern diner on there, and then another decade later moved to their present location and expanded it.
But they did, they built the new Pompton Queen, and as it was ready, they shut down the old Pompton Queen, so that they didn't really lose any time in between. It was like, here we go, we're shutting this one down today, and there you are, the next one is open.
The question that immediately comes to mind is the people that were having their queen salad, because in 1969 they actually had the queen salad. Yeah. But the people in that time that had the queen salad, perhaps, or the lasagna or whatever it was, did they have to did you see people carrying their plates across the parking lot to the new building? Or did they close for even a minute?
Story, but no, that's not how it happened. But one place as it closed, yes, the new place was opening, so it was sort of a transfer of power, and it was very interesting. To be one of the first people in the new place was wonderful, because that's what everybody wanted to see. What's it going to look like?
Open 24 hours a day, all year round, and providing an extensive selection of items comprising breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The diner, as it is often referred to by patrons, is the go-to place when the question becomes, where are we going to go?
It's funny, that's where I would always go with my friends, and that's where my kids always went with their friends.
Seems to be the community center. In fact, I'm told that after our worship services, that's where the real coffee hour happens. It's at Pompton Queen.
Started going to the Pompton Queen many years ago, and I now find my kids go there with their friends after school.
And when they come back from wherever they're living and wherever they are now, they always go back to the Pompton Queen.
It's a great diner. You can get, a great breakfast, a great lunch, and an outstanding dinner.
It's great. We've been going there since I was a kid. We'd go there after events at night. We'd go there 2, 3 in the morning. We used to play Pac-Man in the lobby.
I love having breakfast there because you can have breakfast anytime you want. So usually, eggs, bacon, pancakes.
Chicken and waffles. The cheeseburgers are great. My favorite thing is to make a cheese sandwich.
Triple berry pancakes. Every time I go, they're the best. Disco fries. They're the most amazing thing that's ever been created.
They are it's a wonderful, I guess you could call it a side dish, but it's really a meal.
Disco fries, isn't that where they put the gravy and the cheese and everything? They sort of load everything on it.
Disco fries are usually big, thick, fat French fries, cut big that way, and they usually have some sort of like a thick gravy or sometimes cheese on them.
French fries covered with gravy, right?
Disco fries are basically French fries with lots of cheese melted on top, and then a bucket of gravy poured over that.
Now, when you say gravy, you don't mean like the red gravy, like in your grandma's Sunday morning gravy, but you're talking about with the brown gravy.
That's a brown gravy.
Brown turkey gravy.
Brown sauce gravy, like turkey mashed potatoes gravy.
Disco fries are great. A base of fries covered with some gravy and some melted mozzarella cheese. That's all you need right there.
In Jersey culture, there's things that people know from New Jersey that unlike anywhere else in the United States. 1, we don't pump our own gas. 2, we love to congregate at the diner.
Taylor ham or pork roll?
Oh, it's definitely Taylor ham.
Okay.
Taylor ham.
Taylor ham. I'm from Long Island, man. It's Taylor ham.
Taylor ham or pork roll?
For me, it's Taylor ham.
Taylor ham.
Taylor ham.
That's funny. I'm from Baltimore, so crabs. Hard shell crabs.
Great answer.
There is a distinction between pork and ham. Ham is only the meat on the pig that's found on the either on the butt or the legs.
Taylor ham.
Taylor ham.
Taylor ham.
Is it Taylor ham or pork roll?
Right.
Taylor ham.
That's ham, so that's very distinct. Pork can be meat on any part of the pig, and Taylor ham pork roll is really processed pork. That's so that the people down in South Jersey say, well, its real name is pork roll, and they got a point. That's right, and that's kind of the short story on a very long tradition. But again, there's something. Taylor ham sandwich with egg and a slice of cheese on a roll. I mean, there's your classic Jersey diner sandwich.
When you order it though, like what do you order?
I say Taylor ham.
Doesn't matter where you go, it's Pompton Queen
That's
always. No matter what time of the day, it's Pompton Queen. And Tommy and Sammy are great.
Robbie's family, this is the first time in almost 90 years that it isn't in the Jones family anymore. This is the famous counter where all the business was transacted. This section actually was built in 1953 by Robbie's father. When the railroad came through in around 1872, commerce changed a bit and the railroad station became the community center. Shortly thereafter, the Berry family, who owned this property at the time, opened Berry's store. It was later owned by James Evans, who was the Medal of Honor winner from the Civil War, who lived in the Martin Berry house and also was the station agent. And so it was a community center by then. Well, yeah, this is the original store part, and the old wall was just about where you see that partition there. And this part of the building dates to probably the middle 1800s. And as I said, Robbie's father actually extended it towards the back. So this was the entire store. And at one point, this had a direct entryway into the living quarters. And when they put on the addition, they close that off.
So did they ever tell you any stories about maybe like on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night, evening or something during business hours, maybe they wake up from a nap and some customers like wandering around their bedroom or something like that? Anything like that ever happen?
I haven't heard that directly, but it's entirely possible. We're actually over the front porch area that has been frequently impacted by the tractor trailer truck.
That keep hitting the building.
And I'm surprised the plaster is in this good of shape.
Right, but I mean, is this cracking from where the tractor trailers kept
Well,
running into the
they
building?
hit right below it, and the last time it hit, I was about 5 feet away inside the store, and the whole building shook.
Two guys show up, and one's from the state, one's from the county, highways and byways. So I'm going on about the parking, and we're not here about your parking, we're here about you encroaching upon our right-of-way. So I said, what? He said, you are encroaching upon our right-of-way, our road. So I said, you know what? My father said, we're going to get caught. I said, Dad, there's nobody in the county or the state smart enough to realize we're jacking the building up and moving it closer.
This was a full-time job, almost 24/7. Robbie got up very early in the morning, as his father did. Preparation of the day's activities, bills, sorting out orders. You worked until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, depending on the time. And yes, it might have been more organized, but you know, Robbie and his employees, at one time he had 4 full-time employees here as well, all learned the system, and it worked. Well, people will be nostalgic for the building, who remember it as one of the centerpieces of our town, and they'll remember, you know, coming in here to get that needed part or whatever. But I think what most of them will miss is the family. When we're preserving the building, it's just going to be a building. Even if you rented it out for law offices and other functions, if you're able to rebuild it all up to code to do that, it wouldn't be the same community meeting place. It would just be a nice old building in town. So part of what people are going to miss is the family themselves. Every time after a snowstorm, Robbie's father would put the harness on one of the horses or ponies and hitch up the sleigh and do a complete circuit of the town. And the memory is, you know, Robbie running up on the front porch, banging on the door, Jay, sleigh ride. And my mother throwing the coat, and we'd jump into the sleigh and do a circuit around the town, and it was the most thrilling thing. It's something I'll never forget, and that was something that his father gave the experience to so many of us kids back then.
Now, you got to give it hell to get across the boulevard to get to Post Road. So Dad, you know, off we go. Well, I hear this noise, I turn around and look, and I just see 4 legs up in the air. The seat had broken off of the sled. And I'm like, Dad.
And that's an example of how the family became part of your life.
And I think that's what people need to remember. It's not the building, it was more the Jones family.
I don't know if it's the building as much that I miss as it is the feeling that Jones Hardware was.
And it's all wrapped up with the family.
Towns change, and we have to move on. And I'll miss the landmark, but I'll mostly miss the family.
And this is like a little workshop.
Okay.
That's a 3-stall outhouse.
So Rosa and Coletti is sitting in the van, and we're standing outside watching all the activity. And she says, do you have a bathroom we could use? I said, I have an outhouse. She says, a what? I said, it's a 3-seater, so there's no. So she actually crossed her legs and said, I will wait till I get back. So yeah, that was, she did not appreciate Pompton Plains. Get back to the.
And again, like always, there's a flag. We don't have too many of those at Pequannock, do we?
This is the oldest part.
The oldest part.
You can see some of the original farm plowing implements and whatever still here.
Wow.
Obviously, they haven't been, nobody needed them since the 50s and early 60s when the farming stopped in the community. Over there is the fish pond, and that fish pond probably existed since the 1930s. And Robbie, as a young kid, I would go out and watch him. He'd be chopping a hole in the ice so the basically the large goldfish or whatever could breathe and get oxygen.
Right.
And it's been improved over the years, but this was one of the features of the property.
Wow.
And it's partially drained right now.
Huh. But, so there used to be like goldfish and like stuff like that in here, like decorative fish and stuff?
Right.
Nice.
And he just took the last bunch out, and his sister took them up in Sussex.
Right.
But
Wow.
yeah, there's so many memories here, and occasionally the prize pony fancy would be out here, and each year Robbie's father had a Christmas Eve party where everybody in the community would gather in the woodshed there.
So Jay, as you tell me about all these things, you know, all these memories, all this stuff, you're gonna miss it.
I miss it already.
Of all the changes that I've seen over these years, the one thing that's really going to be heartfelt is to see Jones's Hardware to leave that corner.
I've known Jones's Hardware my whole life. I hated to see it go.
When I drive by, it's sad. When I don't see it there any longer, it's sort of sad.
When you drive by, there's a little piece of you that has a bit of sadness.
It makes me very sad.
You miss what you remember, you know, as a little girl, or, you know, going there with your father.
It's a place I went ever since I was a little girl.
I have 2 daughters, and from the time they were very young, we'd go there on Saturdays and get, you know, whatever we needed for around the house. So to them, it's the light bulbs.
And it was sad to see. It was a huge town event when that store closed. I was standing outside the doors because I wanted to see the doors be locked for the very last time.
It does feel empty. As a matter of fact, I, like everyone else, I think, took a picture with my car in front of the barn. I'm going to miss going down to Jones's ever since I was small for the stuff I needed. I'd rather go see Jonesy than anyone else.
Walking around Woodland Lake on a hot summer afternoon. Stretching out at Greenview Park, the smell of autumn is coming soon. From the buried house to the railroad station, it's my hometown before a nation. Church to the congregation, it's my hometown before a nation. It's my hometown before a nation. It's my hometown before a nation. It's my hometown before a nation.
Well, this has been part of Pequannock since I was growing up in the 50s and 60s. It's just kind of a shock to see it go. It's inevitable. We knew it was going to happen, but there's a big difference between knowing what's going to happen and seeing it actually happen.
Yeah, and you know it has a lot of effect on, you know, the people who grew up around here, and this has been a structure in their life forever. And all of a sudden it's gone.
really sad. It's really sad. It's we're gonna miss a landmark of this area. Missing coming into the store and being able to hear Robbie's stories and knowing that it's not going to be here anymore. It's really sad.
Progress is a double-edged sword. You do lose a lot of the historic value of things that people like to look at and know that's there. But on the other hand, if we didn't have progress, we'd all still be living in caves.
My personal opinion is that change anywhere is inevitable. You change as you grow up. Sometimes you grow up, sometimes you grow out. So sometimes change can be good, sometimes change can be bad.
Change is kind of inevitable, but it's nice when you can save a vintage place like a hardware store or a restaurant or a bowling alley.
So change is good as long as we pace it and we move forward in a way that allows people to come along with us, and that we move in a strong way with deliberate purpose. And so then I think that change is okay.
Change, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but I understand where they're coming from when they say they don't like the change in Jones's Hardware, but you know what? He deserves to retire and move on just like everybody else.
I embrace the change. However, change doesn't, different doesn't mean better, it just means different.
Some things you can't save, maybe some things maybe don't deserve to be saved, that's all in the opinion of the community, but it's nice when you have a mixture of the old and the new.
I'm hoping, I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, it probably will be an improvement. From a heartfelt point of view, you know, we wish Jones Hardware was there with Robbie behind the counter.
My hometown has been around for a long time. That is true. My hometown has seen a lot, but she's always pulled right through. From the First Reformed Church to the congregation, it's my hometown before a nation. Stretching out at Greenview Park, the smell of autumn is coming soon. From the Berry House to the railroad station, it's my hometown before a nation. Church to the congregation, it's my hometown before a nation. It's my hometown before a nation. town.